Hey pottery people, welcome back to the Pottery Plus Studios. I thought we would try something kind of different and fun today and do a reaction video to Jon the Potter. If you found my video, you probably also know who Jon the Potter is, but he does tutorials and he's gained a lot of notoriety, and he does have a lot of really good educational content, so that's kind of why I picked him. But also, I've been watching a lot of like the Welsh twins who are like makeup artists that do YouTube, and I don't do makeup very often, but I like their videos because I learn a lot. And so I kind of took inspiration from them that maybe a reaction video would be something we could learn from. So the video I picked is called 5 Steps to Centering Clay on the Wheel, and it's 9 minutes long. So let's go ahead and get started.
What's up, guys? Today we are talking about centering clay.
One of the hardest steps, so there's a lot of tutorials out there about this topic.
Are talking about centering clay today.
Come on, let's get to it. I want to see the centering. I want to see the centering, Jon the Potter.
Right in the center. It's also one of the most frustrating parts for beginners. Most beginners don't make it long because they can't get it centered. But once you get it centered, everything is so much easier from there. So we just got to learn how to get it centered. We're going to start with just a little bit of clay.
Looks like about a pound.
Something a little bit bigger as well. My 5 keys to centering the clay. Start with a wedged ball of clay.
So here he's wedging, doing a ram's horn technique.
So we've wedged
He's
this.
obviously very experienced.
Second key, throw it down as close to the center as you can. So we have our lines right here, so we're going to throw it down right there.
Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. So you see this a lot. It's really common practice. When you put your clay down on the wheel, you slam it down like this. But if it is off to the side even slightly, it makes centering a lot more difficult. So I know that for experienced potters, you know, you can kind of just slap it down like that. But I would say if you're beginning, it is more imperative that you get that clay truly in the center as best you can. So there's nothing wrong with just setting it down, because then you have an easier chance of getting it in the middle rather than throwing it, and then just pat it. Like, smack it down really good so that it gets that stick, but you don't have to take the risk of like throwing it down like that and it getting, you know, off to the side. Okay.
And I'm pushing from the side first to get it in the center.
He's going really
And
fast.
I'm pushing from the top with this part of my hand right there. So I can already see it's pretty close to centered right there. But say it's...
Okay, so just quickly, something I'm always harping on. I know, if you've watched any of my other videos, you've heard me say this before. He's not talking about, though, the fact that it looks like he's a right-handed person, and so his wheel is going counterclockwise, and his hand position is, like, you know, pretty standard for what a right-handed person would use. But if you are a left-handed person, you would need to flip this around to where your left hand was on top and your right hand was on the side, and you were going clockwise. So just as a side note, that's pretty important because it does make a difference for what your dominant hand is. You know, sometimes as right-handed people, we teach lefties to do it righty, and we don't take that into account, that these are right-handed movements, just like any other thing that we would do. You know, we rely on our dominant hand. So just to quickly throw that in there, if you're learning to center, his techniques are great, but if you're a lefty, you might need to make those adjustments.
See how off center that is?
Ugh.
The fourth key...
Oh, you hate to see that.
Getting it centered. So I'll lock that in, and then I'll come from the top.
So he's saying just lock it in, but when you're a beginner,
And then we're centered.
you
So
kind
that's
of
how we
can't
go from
until
being
you've
uncentered to
practiced
centered
and built
very, very
your
quickly.
strength up a little bit in your arms and your upper
Oftentimes
body.
when I'm teaching young children, if they have an uncentered piece of clay like this, they'll be going like this, and then I'll just take my hand and I'll just push and just lock that right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden they feel it going into center.
So that's a really good point that he just made. As an instructor, something that's really effective that you can do without taking over the student's project for them, and I do this with adults, is with centering, if you take your hand on the outside of their hand, so it kind of looks like this, and you push to center for them, then they feel the level of pressure that they need to get to center, and it's greater than what people usually expect. So when your hands are moving around like that, like I think what he's really getting at there is that the students don't have the level of pressure that they need to push it to center yet. So it throws your hands around. But yes, if you give them that experience, a lot of times it's like, whoa, light bulb, and they feel what they're supposed to feel. And that's, so much more effective with teaching centering than trying to put it into words or show them. If they feel it, it's better. But just aside, always ask people before you touch them.
The fifth step to centering clay is time on the wheel. You just gotta do it a lot. So say you
Unfortunately,
can't get it,
he is right about that. It's a big investment of time.
Try it again. You just gotta do it a ton of times until it just becomes really
Oh, here we go with the cone. He's gonna cone it.
A bigger piece. Starting with a round wedged piece of clay. Throw it as close to center as possible.
Or just set it down and pat it. We love you, Jon the Potter.
So a lot of beginners will, if they're in a class or something, they'll constantly be like, oh, is this centered? Is this centered? Is this centered? So how do you know when it's centered?
Yeah.
Well, so when the clay is going back and forth like this and it causes your hands to go like this, that is not centered. Centered. Not centered. Centered. That is not centered.
It's fun.
So once you feel like you have a good base and you can center pretty well, the next thing is to be able to cone it up and go back down, because that can be a really good way to wedge on the wheel.
This is gonna bug me. Ah! He's coning and he doesn't really need to be coning right now.
So this is just basically squeezing from the bottom and then going to the top. And so this is a really good way. You can get air bubbles out, you can get the clay really consistent, and then you can push down from the top.
Okay, I'm going to stop here for just a moment. So I'm annoyed. And this is not a specific Jon the Potter thing. This is a pottery thing in general. Everybody always thinks that in order to center, you need to cone. But I would say if your clay is really well wedged and you're using less than like 3 pounds, you don't really need to do the cone, because what he said is exactly right. It's the cone up gives you access to the more interior levels of clay. And so if there are inconsistencies or air bubbles in there, you can take care of them by kind of stretching the clay out, taking care of anything that gets brought to the surface, and then pushing it back down. But like with 1 pound of clay, I just feel like it's unnecessary. I don't do it unless I feel like something weird's going on in the clay. Then I'll do like a coning method like as needed. But I think we get it in our minds. It's one of those things that I've noticed with adult students. It gets in their mind that they think they have to do the cone for the piece to be for the piece to be centered, and it just really doesn't. Like I said, especially with a small little piece of clay. So I say, if you want to skip that, skip it, because clay can be centered without being coned. And his clay certainly looked beautifully centered already. So to me, that's just like an added step. Okay, here we go.
So just really think about locking that arm in. If your clay is going like this, and you're just following the clay and your hands are going back and forth like this, just think about locking those hands in and making the clay move to your hands.
It will take time to get that.
Your hands with the clay.
That is the motion that you need to master, but it will take some time. It takes time
make that clay
to get that arm lock thing.
Alright, so we are going to have my buddy Sam try and center just to show how hard it actually is, and to show what a lot of beginners actually look like.
I don't think we need to watch Sam center. We know how difficult it is, don't we? So just to wrap it up, I think everything that Jon the Potter covered here was really valuable, and if you are a beginner, you can take all of this advice and these techniques and apply them, and you'll be great, okay? Those little additions that I made, hopefully they were helpful a little bit too, or maybe just slightly entertaining, but I have some pet peeves about the traditional ways that people do stuff. So like that coning thing, like that's just my own kind of like little I don't know, it gets under my skin. It's like, why are you doing that? You're making your life harder. So anyway, that will wrap it up for this video. Thank you for joining us today on Pottery Plus, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and thank you, Jon the Potter. You're awesome. Okay, bye.